Hi, everyone, and welcome to this 13th episode of the NERPS webinar series on the peace and sustainability nexus in the context of global change. Thank you for taking time to join us today. I am Mayub Sharifi, an associate professor at Hiroshima University, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. If this is your first time joining our webinar, the Network for Education and Research on Peace and Sustainability, NERPS, is an international network of educators, researchers, and practitioners collaborating towards the advancement of peaceful and sustainable societies amidst global challenges. We started this webinar series last year and will culminate with the NERPS conference on peace and sustainability that is scheduled for March 1 to 3 next year. And the call for proposals for this event is already online, and we have extended the deadline until November 21st. So I would like to encourage all of you to visit our website and register to the conference. So the theme of today's webinar is the power of data to advance the SDGs, and we are honored to have Dr. Anders Karlsson from Elsevier with us today. Before joining, some housekeeping reminders. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared through our website and social media following the event. If you have questions or comments, you can type them in the chat box or in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen anytime during the webinar. Please just make sure to mention your name and affiliation when adding your comments or questions. Professor Karlsson will talk for about 30 minutes, and then we have time for questions and answers. And also, if you'd like to ask the question yourself, please raise your hand, and I can enable your microphone so that you can ask your question directly. Now, I would like to invite the NERPS director, Professor Shinji Kaneko, for some welcome remarks. Professor Kaneko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ayub. Good afternoon, everybody. So thank you for joining. Again, for those who have already joined before and those who joined the first time, welcome to our webinar series. I'm extremely happy today to have a very special speaker from Elsevier, Japan, as one of the leading, I would say, knowledge enterprises, which can be very strong partnership with academia and support us. And especially, I very much appreciate Dr. Anders, who is supporting NERPS activities from the very early stage of our activities. And so I'm very happy to collaborate in many ways, and this is one of the very specific also achievement of our collaborations. Now, actually, Elsevier Japan is our official partner for our coming NERPS conference in March, and then we'll offer a special opportunity for young researchers. I hope that the Dr. Anders will mention about this possibility in his presentation and try to have some very productive collaborative partnership with Elsevier. So, because as we are still in a very new area and an emerging area to establish the nexus between peace and sustainability, it is really helpful and productive to collaborate the knowledge enterprise like Elsevier to explore the direction for the future in terms of research and practices. So in that perspective, today's topic is very much relevant for guiding us in more like evidence-based kind of way of thinking. And I'm very much looking for a very productive discussion. So now I'd like to welcome Dr. Anders to speak to us. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaneko, and welcome everyone. I have to say I'm quite humbled to be invited to give this webinar at NERPS. It will be around the topics on how data around the research landscape can be used to advance the SDGs. And I do think that without peace, we cannot really advance towards a sustainable future. So the mission you have at NERPS for your work is really, really important. When I grew up in Sweden, my early youth was in the late 1960s and 70s. This was basically in the middle of the oil crisis, and Sweden, well, I guess I was really too young and not at all influential, but Sweden hosted the first UN Environment Conference in 1972. Next year is actually 50 years. Actually, in my own small world, I remember I was pushing my parents to upgrade their old oil heater to a more efficient one. And I think I kept irritating them by turning off the heating inside our house off all the time in order to save energy. So I find it very interesting in some sense, now working at Elsevier, to see how we, from an industry perspective, can contribute to a better, more sustainable ways of living. And I hope we can today have an interesting discussion on how we can support you as academics in your work. And so basically, can you see my slides, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, good. So basically, our planet and society, we're facing very complex socio-environmental challenges. We have environmental degradation, we have the climate change, we see food insecurity, water scarcity, biodiversity loss, just to mention a few. I mean, these issues cannot be treated in isolation. They're all interwoven and require an integrated cross-disciplinary approach. The two pictures here, one is from the Lancet Annual Countdown Report, which this year highlighted that climate change is a key threat to planetary and human health. The second is actually the cover page of the latest Cell Press One Earth journal with a special focus on COP26. I actually picked these to illustrate one way we as publishing industry can support the scientific community by helping you in concentrating your voice for impact. That's one function of a journal, basically. So I will go to three topics here. First, to give a bit of context also on how we can collaborate, a brief intro into the role of what we do as Elsevier and as publishing industry in addressing the sustainable development goals. Next, to be more concrete on the power of data, I will bring up two reports, one which is called The Power of Data to Advance the SDGs, and to give some examples of SDG research and questions around that. And the second one is basically to introduce a very new report, which was launched on October 28th, which is called Pathways to Net Zero, the Impact of Clean Energy Research. So I hope with this, I will raise some questions and ideas, in particular on how we can collaborate. And I really need to stress here that what I present here is an effort of multiple colleagues inside Elsevier, as well as the input from multiple academic experts. So actually a true case of collaboration. So let me start first to give a brief intro to what we do as publishers. So basically, to say a few words about Elsevier, I guess most of you, if you're from the academic community, would know us as a publisher. At this stage, we actually, Elsevier alone, publishes around 2,600 academic journals and many, many books. And as academics, the role of journals is basically to bring together research communities for discussion. We also have broad databases, such as Scopus, which covers more than 7,000 publishers. Using this data, as well as others, we work to support evidence-based policymaking with data and insights. And what you see in the pictures are two cases of pro bono reports. One is around artificial intelligence, and a second around gender in science. And I come back to these, not these very reports, but to examples more close to SDGs. We are also increasingly engaging in partnerships to further enhance the impact of how we can contribute to society together with the research community. So just around the SDGs, just to mention some relevant areas where our work supports, in particular would be around SDG 3, SDG 5, SDG 10, and 13. But of course, also around other SDGs, including SDG 16. Elsevier is part of a bigger company group called RELEX Groups, which also includes, for instance, LexisNexis, which deals with law. And our parent company has a SDG resource center. This has free resources around SDGs. It brings together latest news, scientific content, podcasts, and different ways to track the research discussion around the SDGs. As most universities would know, we also collaborate with Times Higher Education around the impact ranking. And our data stands for around, I think, 30% on average for the Times Higher Education impact rankings. Furthermore, we have schemes such as something called the Atlas Award, which is looking to give awards for research towards a better world. Elsevier also has a foundation called the Elsevier Foundation, which supports women in science and provide institutions in lower and middle income countries with access to peer review content, mainly through what is called Research for Life, which is a cross-publisher collaboration to provide free or very low-cost access to the lowest income countries in the world. So you saw there in the middle a circle called the Sdg Publisher Compact. So this is a cross-publisher initiative. So we, as part of the International Publisher Association, have worked with the United Nations to create this Publisher Compact. This was launched at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 2020. It features 10 concrete actions that publishers, Publisher Association, and others can commit to accelerate the progress on the SDGs. There are around 150 fellow publishers and publisher organizations that have signed up to this at this stage. So I think this is a very interesting cross company and cross association initiative. So a bit more concretely in bringing together communities. One role I believe we can and should play, this done while respecting, very much so, respecting the academic freedom of researchers to submit your work to where you see most fit. We can collaborate still around conferences and offer, for instance, for these conferences. Again, with the respect that as academics, you should choose where you submit your work. We, for instance, also have our own conference organization, but we also can support other conferences, for instance, asking our editor, often targeted towards early career researchers. And this is all about leveraging. So as you know, as Professor Executive Vice President Kaneko already was mentioning, we will work together on the NERPS conference. Of course, happy to discuss further details either here or offline for more details on how this. To get a bit more into the gap to policy, how can we further engage both? There are different forums. I want to highlight here in Europe, we have collaborated with a business organization called Science Business, where we supported a closed forum with scientists and policymakers to better understand which are the paths to which climate science can get, can I say, better taken up by policy. Here in Japan, we are a regular participant and corporate member to the SDS Forum. In Europe, we are working, for instance, with the falling walls. I also want to mention, maybe my apologies for being a bit biased. I'm a member of the INGSA Asia Steering Committee, and we see also strong value in the work done by INGSA, the International Network for Government Science Advice, because many members directly speak to government. So what you see here are examples of pro bono reports done in collaboration with external expertise on topics we together with experts were identifying as crucial to address. These reports will have a vast array of data, including global and country overviews, as well as pattern of collaborations, either international collaboration across topics, interdisciplinary collaboration, or collaboration with industry. We will bring in external experts to provide commentaries and to contextualize these works. And in moving on in my presentation, what does this really mean? To make it more concrete, I will, for the rest of this presentation, mention two recent works. By the way, please feel free to put things in the chat and we can go back to that afterwards. So I will show here, basically go through two examples of reports. In 2015, we published the first report around the SDGs. And in 2020, 5 years after the SDGs were launched, we published a follow-up report, which was actually called The Power of Data to Advance the SDGs. All these reports are available online. And I will show a bit of data from start with this report. So why do we do this? It's really about what you measure, you can change. So an increased awareness on the SDGs will help to inform issues around national competitiveness, environmental protection, social justice, equity and inclusions. And if you do measurements and assessment of evaluation across research related to SDGs, this can enhance the ability to influence. It could be areas of investments for funding agencies, as well as how to have better outcome and impact. Some of the data we bring to the table are listed here, and I will just show some of that. They would be around research and impact. So just to note here, together with a group of universities, we have developed quite a precise methodology to assign research publications to SDGs. And we do this in our database Scopus and another tool as well. And this doesn't just cover Elsevier work. It is across 77,000 publishers. So it's a very, very broad global coverage. So it's not just across Elsevier. It's across globally across publishers. And this is the same methodology that is used by Times Higher Education. So to give a first type of result, two examples. When we looked into the world of SDG research, the research published addressing the SDGs as we have identified. When we look at the country of origin for SDG research, almost every article related to the SDGs were primarily from high and middle income countries. And the United States, China, and the United Kingdom were ranked within the top 3 in publication volume for almost all SDGs. interestingly, as we are with NERPs, SDG 16, justice, peace, and strong institutions, and SDG 5, gender equality, had the highest proportion of papers from high-income countries, with 78%. And SDG 1, no poverty, featured the highest contribution from low-income countries, with 2.1%, only 2.1%, one can think. And this was the highest from the lowest income countries. So I guess a question to ask, as you're researchers, most of you attending, are results like these interesting? So if so, I hope it will inspire to dig deeper into really the question why it is so. We want to use this to inspire to research and to inform policy. So we can also look at how different countries are publishing across certain SDGs in terms of their research. This graph would show how active in research publications a country is around an SDG compared to how active the world is around that SDGs. And it's normalized to the point where a relative activity of 1 means that you as a country is as active as is the world. So if we look here in green at Japan, SDG 3, SDG 7, and SDG 14 would be the most relatively active. But you can see, compared to the US, China, and the UK, the pattern is different on one hand. On the other hand, potentially as a policymaker, you see that Japan, as we can measure it from our database, is relatively less active in focus on SDG research compared to the world, because the relative activity is lower than 1 from many areas. So again, a big question here would be, which I would ask myself, is this result any surprise to anyone here? If it's no surprise, well, your knowledge is better confirmed. If it is a surprise, then again, the question as a researcher is, why is this so? And can we know more? So this is one example of the potential power of data on the SDGs. Another question we have asked, given that there is strong evidence that things like education, health, economic security, and also climate change have different effects on men and women, to what extent does research take into SDGs take into effect sex and gender aspects? So we looked at this using a keyword analysis on what are sex and gender research, and then combining that with what is research on the SDGs. So as a quick check, we see that 95% of the papers we have around SDG 5, gender equality, will look at sex and gender aspects. So, I mean, that seems very reasonable. And this is kind of a checkpoint that the queries we are using are good. But then look at the other SDGs. And you can see here for SDG 16, 31% of the research publications would address sex and gender aspects. And for this, we look through the abstracts of the papers, basically, and keywords. So it's a search made on the titles and abstract of papers, if they were addressing sex and gender aspects or not. So 31% on SDG 16. Okay, we can dig deeper. Let me look at 2 other cases. So SDG 3, good health and well-being. You can actually see, and we can send the slides later if you're interested. In blue, you see areas which are really not addressing sex and gender aspects. And the more towards you go towards green, in my colors, you would address it more. So you can go into each around keywords as well in the publications. And there we see 61% of papers take this, sex and gender aspects into consideration. Okay. Now let's have a look at SDG 13 around climate. Around climate change, only 4%. 4% of the research publications around climate change would take sex and gender aspects into account. Okay, while it may be a bit natural that papers from the physical sciences don't directly take these aspects into account, still women and other minorities are significantly impacted by climate issues, more so than men. So only 4% of SDG 13 research potentially is really quite low. Further, of course, women would play a critical role in being responsibility around climate change due to local knowledge and leadership, also in terms of sustainable resource management and in leading sustainable practices, quite often on the household and community level. So this gap potentially should be a concern. So I hope this example from this report, the power of data to advance the SDGs, will pose some questions and ideas to probe further, and also make you think, how could this type of data be relevant? So let me switch gear a bit to talk about the second example. This is a brand new work that looks into the landscape of clean energy research. This, of course, is in the light of the ongoing Conference of Parties, COP26. So as you would know, 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions comes from burning fossil fuels, globally about 2/3. So getting a clean energy system is one of crucial pathways to what is called net zero. To reach there, we need to deploy existing technologies well. This requires governance and a broad societal change, but we also need further research in both to improve the existing technologies and find new ways to produce energy without greenhouse gas emission, or even ways to capture back things that we have already put out in the atmosphere too much. So this report, which was released on October 28, is a collaboration of a large internal team, as well as with the crucial advice from an external group of expert academic advisors. So I show here just some key themes brought up. And I think I will not read them. It's more than 100 pages report, actually. You can download it from there. But I think from the aspect the report is addressing, you can see where there could be relevant connections to policy, as well as further questions for research. And to provide further context, the report also features a number of interviews, including a foreword by Ban Ki-moon. So let me go into some of the results of the report. First, to mention, how do we define clean energy research? We define it as research within SDG 7, as well as research from SDG 13, but with an energy filter put on top of it. And this definition was agreed together with our external advisory committee of experts. So even to put a bit more clear, what are the areas investigated? This net zero energy research, we'll refer to it as N0 energy in what I discuss further. So here's a snapshot of the top 50 keywords from the titles and abstracts around clean energy research. So you can actually see here, as you may expect, battery technologies, electric vehicles, and solar cells are among key research priorities. but also things such as Internet of Things, which would relate, for instance, to energy management systems. Biodiesel also comes out as an area. This is actually an area where India has the largest global research output. So this would give you a flavor of the topics that comes into the net zero research. Okay, in terms of volume of publication, net zero research, or N0 energy, is growing, with China in the lead. In 2020, around 5% of global publications in this area around 5% of global publications was from around net zero energy. In 2001, around 1% of global publications were in net zero energy. China accounted for 24% of all net zero energy publications during the 20-year time period. This is most of all countries. We can look into this in a different way. I think on the, let's see, on the right side for you, you'll see the net zero energy output, where China is in the top by 24% of all publications, the US number 2 with 17%. To your left, I would guess, is from all areas of research. And there you would see the bar is the highest for the US. US during this 20-year time period is actually the highest. Whereas for net zero energy research, China is the top. China on top, the US, India, Germany, and on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth place is Japan, with around 5.4% of the global output in the net zero energy research is from Japan. Okay. As clean energy are being deployed, the patent landscape becomes highly interesting as well. Of course, it's quite a lot of applied technology. So of course, patenting is extremely important to look at as well. Here we're actually using patent filing data or patents from Elsevier's sister company, LexisNexis patent site. And I ask you to note here that the graph here is logarithmic. It's logarithmic. And on this logarithmic scale, what you can see here is that China has seen an almost exponential growth, with the largest patent portfolio in carbon-free energy technologies by 2015, surpassing the US in 2012 and Japan in 2014. China is filing and getting patents very strongly, quite a lot within China, but it's the largest in the world in terms of patents around net zero energy as well. Actually, by the end of 2020, if you look carefully at the logarithmic scale, almost half of all global active patents originated in China. Quite interesting. So to go back a bit to policy, it's a bit hard to see this graph. I do apologize, and I don't ask you to see all of this. We have also looked into the interesting aspect of how is primary research taken up into policy documents and by general media. To do this, we use something called Overtone, which is a large searchable index of policy literature. And we use Plumex, which is kind of an altmetrics, which tracks science in social media. What you see to your right, my left, is which country or international government organization, IGOs, who are taking up research in their policy documents and from which country. And if your country is not at all being picked up by any country or any organization, there's something to think about, right? But being able to track this flow of information, we believe this could be an interesting way to look at how primary research moves into policy. So with this, I'm actually at the end of my part. I hope I didn't take too long time. So basically, I showed a lot of examples of data and analytics from our public reports. So what I would like to end with is a bit the following, and rather conclusion, but some questions. And just to reflect back, to my curious self, who was a teenager, I was really wanted to make a difference in how we could treat nature and life on our planet better. Then now in an industry position, how can we as industry and academia collaborate to have an increased impact towards the SDGs? And how do you, from the academic side, or industry participants who may be here as well, see the role played by the analytic work I showed and what I presented today, and what are the key questions that should be addressed? So with that, I look forward to our discussion here today, and I stop share. And by the way, in the background, you can see one of the things we as Elsevier have been doing. We have a very active internal work towards the SDGs. And this year we signed the climate pledge to be fossil free by 2040 at the latest. We're already having all our energy by renewables, and we're working across all emission pieces. And we have signed the climate pledge to be 10 years before 2050. Okay, I stop there. I apologize for using a lot of time. So I open the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karlsson, for the very interesting presentation. These types of analytics are certainly very useful. So before opening the floor, I just want to briefly mention that we, the academia, we can certainly use this kind of analytics results to see what are the main gaps that we should focus on to further improve progress towards SDGs. And certainly the issues, for instance, related to gender equality that you highlighted today show a very clear example of areas that need more research. So now we have about 20 minutes for questions and answers. So again, please use the chat box or Q&A box to share your questions. And also, if you want to speak directly to Dr. Karlsson, please just raise your hands and we can unmute your microphone. So while we're waiting for questions, there are two comments from Mr. Alan Fermin. If you could kindly let us know your affiliation. So the comments are, one is, it's interesting to see gender differences in the research of specific SDGs. Although this is definitely interesting, a more interesting approach would be to identify the causes of such differences. Identifying such causes could more directly benefit the development and adoption of policies to improve such numbers. And another one is for the net zero energy research. How much of those numbers translate in actual efforts to protect the environment? For example, although China shows a high net zero energy research, recent numbers by the UN show that China emission of carbon dioxide and river pollution is the highest in the world. So Dr. Karlsson, would like to react to that?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Fermi. These are two very, very interesting questions. To address the first one, actually, we have been working with the community to look in separate reports. We have done 3 gender reports around the gender topic as such, to look into, try to understand what are the challenges of researchers along their career path, for instance. And by having data to try to highlight some of these challenges, working with the community to see what could be policy interventions to improve things. So thank you for that question. And around the second topic, yes, that's a very, very interesting one. And we internally had quite some discussions on whether how to look at the research volume done. And if you compare that to, for instance, what is the carbon emission, either or greenhouse gas emission, either for a country or per capita, how do these two relate? And for sure, many countries, including China, needs to do much more. And they are investing, the biggest investor in renewable energies, the biggest deployment of solar energy, for instance, while at the same time continue to build in the country new coal power plants. So it is, I don't have the answer, but it's definitely something that is worth to look further into.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's always this kind of gap between research and practice. So in that sense, maybe we cannot blame researchers. We just need to look for better ways to bridge this gap. Another question is from Mr. Juan Diego. The question is why Japan is so low in SDG, mainly SDG 8 and 9. Why is strong in SDG 3?
I cannot directly give the answer around SDG 8 and 9. Around SDG 3, I mean, a lot of this comes from medicine, and medical research in Japan has, I mean, traditionally been quite strong. So I believe that is one reason. SDG 8 and 9, one challenge we have with some of these data is that there is notably in, let's say, Asiatic language, not a full coverage in our database. We cover, I think we have the best coverage, but it's not a full coverage. So you will see in some areas where you publish, let's say in Japanese in this case, you will see in other areas where research is more into policy papers, which are not into the academic literature. So there is this gap. But I'm afraid I cannot answer directly on the SDG 8 and 9. I would have expected 9 to be a bit stronger potentially. But SDG 3, this is clear. If you look overall, Japan is very strong in medical research. Does that answer your question?
I think, yeah, I think that this was a very clear answer. Thank you, Dr. Karlsson. So just to follow up, I would like to know is it possible for Elsevier to communicate these fundings to Japanese funding agencies or like Ministry of Education or JSPS to let them know that we also need to pay more attention to other fields? Because I completely see that. Of course, the medical researchers are productive, but they also get a chunk of the funding. Probably this is a clear sign that we also need to pay more attention to other fields, especially social and humanities, social sciences and humanities. So yeah. I would like to just know if it's possible for Elsevier to communicate this issue with the funding agencies here.
Yeah, sure. We typically have regular contacts to funding agencies, and many of the funding agencies are actually using our data. Even the cabinet office are now in their so-called eSISTI system using our data. So we do our best to communicate this. We recently had around this kind of spider chart, so to speak, this web chart. There was a press release for the UK, which showed the UK in very positive light. And I think Japan was in there as well. And maybe we should send that press release to Monkasho and Monkasho, JST, JSPS, and
Great.
others. So yes.
Thank you very much. So we have another question from Ruth. Apologies if I mispronounce. The question is, how is Japan planning to enhance suitable strategies for achievement of SDG 13 in developing countries like Zambia? I'm not sure if Dr. Karlsson is in a position to answer that, but if you'd like to react to that question.
I will hand over to you as expert, but just one thing, JST, as we mentioned them, they for a long time, I'm not sure they still have the SARTREPS program, for instance, in terms of collaboration. And I think actually you from Hiroshima University, you are the topic expert. So if Ayub or Professor Kaneko would like to address this comment.
Yeah.
Maybe. Well, thank you. Then I think they are still continuing this SATREPS project. I don't know how many projects that is operated or has been operated in Zambia, but in general, this SATREPS is the joint funding scheme between Ministry of Foreign Affairs and JICA, and then Ministry of Education like MEXT and JST. So the idea is to implement the science and technology innovation into those, development solution in developing countries, and try to collaborate the academia and also practitioners. So the idea of those co-funding scheme is one of the approaches of, I think, Japanese government. And the other one, I think very recently, our new prime minister committed some kind of financial support for the developing countries. And then one of possibility for the future might be, the use of those financial resources together with those scientific innovations. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Kaneko. So Ruth, now you also have this option to ask questions if you'd like to ask directly further questions, or are you happy with the answer?
I'm okay with the answer very much. I have been part of the SDGs program at Hiroshima University. I've seen how the government of Japan is trying also not only to promoting SDG 3, but also SDG 1, 2, as well as SDG 4. And also SDG 17, where they're creating partnerships with other countries and the universities, supporting programs such as student exchange programs, and all that is contributing to the achievement of all the SDGs, for they are interrelated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next we have Mr. Nagai would like to ask your question.
Sure. I hope you can hear me now.
We do, yes. Okay,
great. So thank you very much, Professor. I certainly learned a lot from your presentation on the power to, visit to advanced SDGs. Then one thing I found really interesting is the data you showed us, which indicates very low percentage of published papers addressing gender issues in especially science-oriented journals, basically based on the science, natural science paradigm. So, but I think it's interesting as just a fact, but still, I don't think it's enough to to show the data to the researchers working, let's say, in science-oriented fields, to to change their attitudes. I mean, because these people are primarily interested in, doing research on what's happening, in the outside world as natural phenomena. Then I even suggest that probably they might not want to get involved in, such social issues. So my question is basically, So how do you think we can really make use of these sorts of interesting sets of data, but at the same time, we also to change, let's say, natural scientist attitudes toward these sustainable issues, which probably might not have been their primary research focus so far. So I think working with the, the academic institutes like Hiroshima University, so NERPS is a good idea, but do you have any other activities primarily intended for making that kind of collaboration? I mean, to help, let's say, scientists pay more attention to social issues, gender issues, etc., etc. So that, if you have any, kind of things or activity you have done at Elsevier, so I'd love to hear.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And my own background is quantum physics, so I can understand from the perspective you come from in that sense.
Cool.
So it's a very good comment. We do a number of workshops, of course. We can work directly with universities to discuss and also to have a dialogue, because universities will have the expertise. We also do workshops together with funders, for instance, to highlight what could be concern, and actually together with funders, for instance, we have been working on inclusion and diversity together with funders to see how they could improve, for instance, on funding streams. Because if funding streams slightly change, researchers would apply. And if you then look at what you want to achieve with your research is really both curiosity, but I believe all of us wants to have some kind of impact.
Mm-hmm.
And if that impact would require you, even if you work in a technology field, to bring in more of interests from the social sciences, for instance, on how a technology could be better applied, or what are things not taking into account, then you could have potentially more of the impact of the work. It also comes to how universities would form and support collaboration across, if you like to say, institutional silos.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not up to me to say that. Our role in some sense is to show some of these type of data and be a bit of catalyzer working together for this dialogue. But we do, again, to emphasize, we have workshops, we work directly with funders on various topics to facilitate this. And we do see of some concern this kind of the clean energy research, for instance. It was not as interdisciplinary as we thought it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And this was commented by the experts, saying that this may hinder the uptake of these technologies. So, Dr. Nagai, does this help with the question you asked?
Yeah, definitely. I think that you really clarified the very important issue that probably we all should think about in the coming years. So thank you very much for answering my question.
Thank you. We have two more questions, more related to methodologies of your analysis. One is from Dr. Tanaka. He wants to know if Elsevier has intention to pick up and focus on the interlinkages between SDGs in some special issues. Another is from Dr. Kasuga from Future Earth. She wants to know how you categorize publications by SDGs. Is it by relevant keywords or by explicit inclusion of each SDG in the title, keywords, text, etc.? And second question is if you are finding researchers which aim to contribute to setting quantitative SDGs targets, such as by providing global indicators. these efforts are still lacking in national efforts in promoting SDGs. And the third question is if Elsevier is interested in collaborating with Earth Commission. And so these are the three questions.
Okay. So first question from the Dr.
Tanaka.
Tanaka, I have to go back to the exact. Yes. Sure, this is very interesting. The interlinkages are very, very important. We may have in the first 2015 SDG report looked at this a bit, but it's something that could be done. And I will bring that question back. So definitely, because the SDGs are interlinked. To Professor
Kasuga.
Professor Kasuga, yes, the SDG methodology has been developed together with universities as first, based on a keyword approach. And then you have to realize that a individual paper could belong to different SDGs as well. That's the part of the interlinkage. And we have boosted this up actually also using machine learning. And all of this methodology is transparently available, exactly how this has been done. And this is part of how we have been working also with Times Higher Education. Look, we're very open to collaborations and happy to catch up after how we could collaborate further. And there were three questions, so let's see what I missed.
Yes, so question number 2 is if you are finding researchers which aim to contribute to setting quantitative SDGs targets, such as by providing global indicators. So because she believes these efforts are still lacking in national efforts in promoting SDGs.
Okay, sure. Again, we could, it's something that can be discussed further because we do have on a country level, we have on a global level on the research side. And as you would know from Future Earth, that there are quite a lot of work going on. And I have also seen the Indian SDG index, for instance. And if there are ways that the research component can contribute to those, of course, happy to discuss further and bring this also to our global team on what could be done together.
And the third question was if Elsevier is interested in collaborating with the Earth Commission.
So since we are at 4 o'clock, my answer will be very simple, yes.
Yeah, so Dr. Karlsson, I understand that you have a very busy schedule. We have 2 more questions.
I'm happy to stay.
Time,
sure.
Yeah, so thank you. One question is from Dr. Yamane here at Hiroshima University. She says, I think the data you use on contributions to each SDG is from Elsevier SDG mapping, which is also used for impact ranking. Is it still in process of improving? If so, could you please share more information?
Okay. Here, I mean, the original SDG queries with Times Higher in 2020 were updated to 2021. And this has increased the precision of how we can assign a paper to an SDG, as well as in how, so we are missing less, so to speak, and this has been improved. And I believe there is continued effort on doing that. We have also in our RELX SDG Resource Center, an effort, a kind of crowdsourcing, where you as a researcher can say if a paper belongs to a certain SDG. So how this will be improved, I think it's all a question of iteration. But just to mention right now for the 2021s, we have also used machine learning to improve things even further.
Right, thank you. And the last question from Dr. Fermin, again from Hiroshima University. He is doing research on psychiatry, and it's the first time attending this meeting. So he is wondering if you have already presented in previous meetings, or if you could say something today about the topic on human health and well-being.
I personally, I can, if we can send to you some of the efforts we have been working with, and one of my colleagues, who is also a wellness coach, actually made a call at one of the latest Times Higher Education Summits, saying that this should be highly prioritized by the universities. So if I can actually follow up either with NERPs, so you can put the reply on your website, or directly to you, that would be good. Because sure, especially during these times, we have all been under pressure, right?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Karlsson. So once again, thank you very much for taking time to give this excellent presentation. And from the number of questions that we received, it's very clear that how interesting it has been. And on behalf of my colleagues at NERPS, I also would like to once again thank you all for finding time and attending today's webinar. Before closing, I would like to invite you to visit our website at nerps.org and subscribe to our newsletter for updates on our activities, including the upcoming webinars, and also the NERPS conference that I mentioned earlier would be organized from March 1 to 3 next year, and the deadline for submitting proposals abstracts is November 21. And the conference will also be a hybrid conference, so you can join online if you're interested. So once again, thank you very much for taking time. Thank you, Dr. Karlsson. It was really great to have you here. And we also look forward to further collaborating with you in the future.
And from my side, again, I was very honored, and so many interesting questions. And I do hope to be able to visit Hiroshima again for the conference and the beautiful region. So
we look forward to hosting you.
Thank you.